Now, the final analogue switch-off set for the 31st of March will not go ahead as planned later this month. The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria has suspended the switch-off deadline and interdicted the minister from implementing it, pending a final determination on Part B, which is the review of the lawfulness of the decision to set the deadline to 31st March 2025. Our Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Burns, joins us to expand on the conversation. William, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Your efforts to haul the communications minister to court have paid off. He was even slapped with a cost order. What's your reaction?
Well, obviously, we welcome the ruling. It's an extraordinarily positive one. It's an extremely negative one for government and the minister in particular, and indeed the presidency. And the court found on almost every ground that we lodged an objection to. So in the first instance, the court said it was Cabinet that made the decision, and in fact it shouldn't have been Cabinet that made the decision. It was the minister who was meant to make the decision. Then they also confirmed that in fact the minister hadn't consulted with all the relevant stakeholders, including MMA and SOS, and that the minister hadn't, that we were presented with the date as a fait accompli, which is there. They also said, I think most tellingly and importantly, that this would have had devastating, irreparable damage to the millions who would have lost access to television. And on top of that, it would have been a fatal blow for the SABC had it gone ahead. So quite why government insisted on surging ahead when, again, the minister as late as last year, September, had stood up in Parliament and said that the date needed to be delayed. And then mysteriously, Cabinet suddenly decided that actually it needed to be fixed for March, which isn't to say that there doesn't need to be urgent radical change. It's just that when you don't do your job, as government has failed to do for the last decade, it's no good then going and saying, oh, we'll just switch it off anyway, and to hell with the consequences and damn to the poor.
With government's failures over the last decade, the judgment is clearly at this point a political setback for Minister Solly Malatsi, who has been accused of repeating a mistake made by his predecessor, Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni.
Again, it's entirely mysterious as to what led to this. It's anyone's guess as to what really went on in that cabinet meeting, because as I've said, if you go back, you'll see that in September, the minister had stood up in Parliament and said there was no doubt the date needed to be delayed. And yet suddenly Cabinet's coming and pronouncing and saying, no, actually the date is determined. And then the minister is having to stand up and defend that particular action. So it's a huge setback for government. It's another very embarrassing loss. And the reality, though, is that at least millions aren't going to have their signal cut off, which still doesn't solve the problem, however, of making sure that we find sustainable solutions, making sure that we find answers to how we ensure that everyone in South Africa can have access to a quality digital product and to free-to-air services. That's where we need to be, instead of having to be constantly going to court to fight what are patently and obviously bad decisions.
Yeah. Minister Malatsi is interdicted from taking any steps to implement the switch-off of analogue signals and ending dual illumination. What kind of opportunity does this now present?
So hopefully it allows for us to do a bit of a reset in terms of making sure that there can be appropriate consultation. Hopefully it means we can start to look at a progressive way forward to make sure that we can move ahead with getting people on access to digital, but not in a way that threatens the survival of the SABC, of other free-to-air broadcasters, ETV, and indeed of the community broadcasters. All of them had said clearly and unambiguously that this would have been an absolutely disastrous scenario for them. So it wasn't only bad and an anti-poor decision, it was horrific for broadcasters, and yet government just decided that they should surge ahead. So hopefully now is an opportunity to come together and work on something that is actually going to give us a lasting option, that we can effectively deal with this and move into a brighter, better digital future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird, giving us some reaction there as the final analog switch-off set for the 31st of March 2025 will not be going ahead as planned.